Well, I thought I'd make another one on this Cleopatra attempted documentary debacle that's going on right now. And one thing that I wanted to show and look at, of course, myself and read and so on, was what Dr. Zahi Hawass, who has already made a statement on it. This is the man that was basically over Egyptology for years, and now he stepped down to let another man in, who has also apparently made a statement. So I thought I would look at some of those, and then of course Egypt is actually suing Netflix for their misportrayal of ancient Egypt. And from what I understand, Netflix is not allowed to show this in Egypt right now. And one thing I wanted to find out and still haven't truly found out is if they've just got that one display, that one show blocked in there and you can see everything else, or if Netflix itself is banned or not being shown in Egypt at all. There have also been a large contingent of Egyptians who've come out and made videos about it saying, here's Cleopatra, here da-da-da, we all know it. And the one thing that's just kind of strikingly odd about this to me, well, there's a few of them, is that even though this was an overtaking of the Greeks coming in and pushing the Persians out and all the way back to where they came from and a little past, which led to this dynasty, he was heralded as a savior somewhat from all the things that had happened to him just prior to that, and turned into a pharaoh right off the bat and all this type of stuff. Of course, he didn't get to take advantage of any of that. He was pretty much on his way, and people believe he got poisoned and all kinds of things. Don't want to get into it, but his generals were put in the Seleucid dynasty, the Parthian one, the one that's in Egypt, and so on. And the one in Egypt was done by the Ptolemaic dynasties. And so she comes from that. But due to Afrocentrism and this weird Congo kind of cargo cult mentality they have going on, they feel like if anything is said about Africa, it must involve Bantu people from a small area of West Africa that's sub-Saharan, the Sahara being bigger than the United States and impassable, but they can't handle the reality of the truth of it. And this is one of the most outward showings possibly of it. And I hope it gets a dialogue going to where we can get an understanding of who was what and where, and perhaps these envious, jealous lies and things that come from it might slow down, if not stop totally. I do not believe that you could get them to quit if you had to, but at least it'll get the point out there to let everybody know that any of this type situation is just a joke. Another oddity is that Greeks have not really come out and said anything, and from my understanding they only have a few comments by a few people. One of their guys that has to do with their office that has to do with Egyptology somewhat, just his comment was supposedly it's a joke. Like they tried to catch him going out to the car, I don't know. And and he goes, yeah, it's a joke, and got in the car and left. Anyhow, so what I've found here is this guy that's doing a little bit of commentary on the fact that Netflix isn't clean and squeaky in any way, shape, or form. They've been having pseudo child PORN show up and things like that in their a little girl show that they had. What was it called? Glitters or something. Anyhow, disgusting. And it's happened over and over and over again. And when people noticed it, they start trying to defensively really show their hand of what's going on. So some people would say that this is not unexpected, but other people would say there's no reason to have even possibly done this. This Netflix series is supposed to be about sub-Saharan black African queens, the only possible black African queens there were in reality. So why don't we show some of them? Well, they tried that recently with the woman king of Dahomey, and then a lot of black people were probably rather surprised to find out that their own people were capturing their own people, and that was funding the whole thing from it. And the Islamic slave trade began over 900 years before the Americas were found, because it seems like, and I've heard this comment from 3 people now, that blacks almost want to act like history began whenever they got to America. That they have this weird point of view. And that's something that kind of fits with that cargo cult idea. I did a recent video about that, and I behoove you, even if you may have seen it before, to take a look at that and see if you don't see this attitude and mentality and things coming into this, and this weird oddity where they point at other people they didn't even know existed and start claiming we. So I got this from this other guy, but that's because he has Dr. Zahi Hawass's statement actually on video. I was going to try to find it on paper and read it out to you, but he's got this, and this is just from 2 days ago, so I guess Zahi Hawass said it Thursday, or maybe Wednesday, and this guy put it out on Thursday. But let's just take a look at what he says coming into this and then showing it, and what Dr. Zahi Hawass says, because some of it's quite telling in itself. And there's also another weird reaction by Zahi Hawass that I would like for you to look at and understand, and then I'm going to show you something that might make you wonder why he would even be using that example. Let's continue though.
30 ideas, of course, but I'm always excited to know their upcoming agendas. Where to? And from one question to another, here it is, answering my questions with its upcoming series, Queen Cleopatra. It is a historical series about the most famous Greek queen who ruled Egypt after the death of Alexander the Great. But what is the problem? Egypt after the death of Alexander the Great. But what is the problem?
Well, perhaps the problem is the name of the executive producer here, because that's Will Smith's wife, the one that helped the slap incident that we all know about from the Oscars. She's been noted as being a racist for years, so some people were actually waiting like vultures for her to come out and try to pull off some Dahomey thing again for another people, and they were going to be able to just pull her to shreds. And believe it or not, some of them are black people, because they're sick of this and it's making them look like a clown on the world stage, and they wanted to quit, but they can't really outwardly critique themselves because of the, oh my gosh, you can see how this weaves into the fact that it's just leaving them a lost people. But so they started making series about black African queens, and the second one out the gate here they're gonna go with is we was Cleopatra. Some people say that the problem with this is that they actually are claiming that it's a documentary, so it would actually have some truth within it. And people that have seen this, it's only been out a couple of days now, people that have seen this have said it's got a bunch of things that nobody else is going to agree that even happened. She's riding a horse in this one part and stuff, and doing these battles with swords with people and stuff, and it's like, that's not, look, you're trying to make this overly strong woman situation, everything out of it, and if you wanted to make it a fantasy, because that's where this little movie idea ought to be, is racist fantasy. Better start making a category for it, because we got a lot of things in there, whether it's Hannibal Barca or the attempts at Queen Charlotte or any of the other ones that they've done like that, or trying to introduce black people into Vikings. A black woman was now a well-known male Viking that went through this whole thing, and they go, yeah, well, he's a black woman now. I don't know at what point to anybody this becomes silly and pandering, but from its origin, it has been. So now, what's the problem with this? Well, let's let Zahi Hawass begin to tell you the problems. And again, there's a little thing in there that I want you to notice. Hopefully you will. I'll come in, you know I will.
I do not think that the film that was made by Netflix about Cleopatra is fair. It is not fair at all, because it is not good to show Cleopatra as black. I will object to also anyone who make Cleopatra blonde, because Cleopatra was not black, Cleopatra was not blonde. Cleopatra was a very light, a Mediterranean, beautiful woman. And there is no evidence at all that Cleopatra was blonde or black. And therefore, in my opinion, Netflix is changing history.
Well, now, I don't know if you caught it there. It happens again, by the way, enough to where you're like, wow, why do you keep mentioning that one thing, that she couldn't have been blonde? I'm going to kind of ruin it for you here in the fact that the next time he talks about it, he actually tries the statement out of his mouth that she wouldn't have been blonde because there's a bunch of blondes in Rome and all that stuff. And so if he came there, he wouldn't be attracted to blondes, just like he would be in Rome or something. And people try to go past that point. What's crazy is I can show you a lot of pictures of Egyptians, not just this Macedonian, that are blonde. Now, I'm not trying to say that she was blonde in any way, but I believe one of her parents were, or grandparents were. But regardless of that fact, she's been shown to have this reddish auburn hair in like 8 or 9 depictions of them. And even that alabaster statue, they found there's little remnants of paint. They used to paint these things. All Roman statues and Greek statues had paint on them. And lo and behold, they said, well, you know, it's kind of an auburn color, kind of a burnt ember or whatever, burnt umber color that they're going with, you know, with a reddish highlight in it. And that's what she probably looked like. You can just wiki Cleopatra and go click the images, and you're going to see this foolish thing being shown while you end up showing it. Now, blacks have always liked the name Cleopatra, and they've always liked the fact of Egypt, even though they're real jealous of the fact that they never even knew it existed, and it was apparently right there in Africa. Problem is it's endemic Caucasians that named Africa by and for themselves, and the whole continent ended up being named it after. You can look it up, but before that it was all called Libya. In a minute, Zahi Hawass is going to talk about Libyans and so on that goes on there. I think I'm going to wait till the next time that he goes off on blondes possibly, and then I'll go through showing you a few blondes in ancient Egypt. And we'll also talk about how that's something that doesn't get shown or talked about very often. But when the DNA stepped up to the plate here recently, it's really shown us a truth and a reality of who these people were versus a narrative that's been given to you. So in Zahi Hawass's opinion, what's up?
Netflix is changing history.
Or trying
For
to.
a while now in Hollywood, campaigns and compliments have been directed towards people with dark skin. For example, Disney's upcoming film, The Little Mermaid, is a remake in the live-action style of series and films that were previously released in the 1990s and early 2000s. But with a slight change, the protagonist in their new film
is actually an extremely light-skinned admixed African-American in a mythology that they had nothing to do with. In fact, it's almost opposite, but yet boom. And then yet somehow, though her father is not of that ethnicity and King Triton and stuff, and then it would be showing her wanting a white man. So here we go with a bunch of problems just trying to interject her into it. And first, well, they thought, well, they'd at least give her reddish hair. So now she's got like Caucasian mimicking hairhead on her with softer hair. She's not got nappy hair in any way. Well, a lot of that's from admix and may have it going on now. Or so are you going to try to pull off that she's an extremely admixed play? What are you trying to pull off whenever you do these type of things? It makes it seem as if there's nothing that you do have that you know of Black history that you want to show whatsoever, in lieu of taking something that's not old to our minds in any way, shape, or form. And it's new, it's brave, it's, oh my God, it's just blackwashing and putting Black people into histories that they never had any part in. Why do you keep thinking this is a good thing to do? It keeps showing up to be a bad choice. I'll give you a hint. There's another video, or a series of people have come out now with, oh my gosh, Rotten Tomatoes, what's their score on this? Well, it's 11% under the tomato meter and 1% on audience score. And they're freaking out because there's been some bad movies. These are critic people too. There's been some bad movies come out in the last 4 or 5 years that they're like, oh my gosh. And then look what the audience says. And sometimes they go off on it and they can show that it's fake because the tomato meter tries to show 90 something and the audience says 14. And then they look at this and they go, you know, the audience is showing 1. In the other scale on another thing, not Rotten Tomatoes, but the other one, the lowest you can give is a 1, and it's got a 1.1. Somebody figured out that out of the 18,000 people that are there, there could have been 2 people that gave it a 5, and it might hit that number because it'll get it to the point where they roll it over. It's disgusting. And yet, they had to have known something like this was going to happen, but oddly, they can't keep from it. It's the Afrocentric kind of cargo cult thing that I've been talking about here lately. And if once you look at both of them, you're like, wow. Then you look at the reality of the way things were and where people were and what was going on. And then you're like, oh man. And it gets worse. And then it gets worse. And the whole time they're stuck in this idea that we was in Bible, we was in Egypt, we was anywhere. In fact, if I can find anybody darker than a sheet of paper, that was us, not ourselves. It's gotten past silly. A lot of people have seen it as a joke. Some people thought that it was over with, but here it come around again.
Is the American singer and actress Halle Bailey, who will be black-skinned. Opinions are divided between supporters and opponents of her choice because the original character is a white-skinned mermaid. And many of the characters portrayed by Black actors show that there is a political agenda behind it, just like forcing deviants into any film produced recently.
Just like Peter Pander there, which ends up showing Black people as part of the Lost Boys, but they include girls too, and they ruin the dynamic of things and all this. And then, of course, the little girl there is all of a sudden a fantastic swordsman and can knock two grown men off at a time and all this, and they turn her into a Mary Sue, if you will. But at the same time, they've ended up taking what is from the fairest of all people and in a mythology that's all known. That's why they call her a fairy. And apparently don't go through any mythology or anything else, but just go, what if Tinkerbell was black? And next thing you know, they take Tinkerbell. But then to try to make it all right, or who knows what, they pick one that's real highly admixed, phenotype a little different. She doesn't have her blonde hair anymore with the fair idea and all that. Got to be taken away and poof. And it's not getting good critical reviews by anybody. And it's funny to look through them because you can go, I bet you freak out and pander and you just want to end up virtue signaling because all these other people are going, hey, it wasn't really good. And I didn't even care about Tinkerbell thing like that. It just ain't good. It's just not done well. And then the parts that they changed about it took all the flavor out of the whole story and everything, and it's just not even done good. I'd rather watch Robin Williams' version of Hook or this, that, and the other, It's gotten pretty bad, but all these different ones, I guess, stand alone, but together they end up making a grouping of false literature and false movies that add up to being that Netflix seems to be having a very big problem with reality somehow, and their answer for it is pretty pathetic. But let's just continue. More Zahi Hawass to come.
And here they are repeating that scenario again in the series Cleopatra, where the actress Adele James will portray her, causing a lot of anger and resentment from Egyptians and those interested in ancient pharaonic history, because black was never the true color of Cleopatra.
So, she even went to Rome until Caesar got killed and then came back and so on off of it. And the depictions we have of her are from that time. And there were, the sculptors of the time, from the king, the whole 9 yards. So we have a pretty decent knowing of the way she looks, but she's been found on so many coins. And in fact, recently, even more, just quadruple and octuple, verifying the whole thing. And then showing another depiction of her in the Taposirus Magna temple, which is in the edge of what old Alexandria used to be. And for years we thought, well, when Alexandria fell and sunk into the ocean there off of it, it's got to be somewhere off the coast there and just probably gone, kushed. But they found so many artifacts of doing that there. And they even found mentions of Cleopatra and thought they had something a few times. But of course, in that Alexandria and then the things that came down through in Cleopatra, you might find that. But in this temple where she recreates the idea of being Isis or Venus, and then Mark Antony is supposed to be where, of course, after the Caesar thing and Caesarea and her kid and so on, Mark Antony ends up being the Osiris to her Isis and so on, and well known. But it just seems like blacks can't handle this. And you saw that lady in the pinkish shirt there. Well, she in the actual trailer that's supposed to be like, come on, look at this show, don't you love it, says that their answer to the idea of what's going on here is, my grandma told me, whatever they tell you, don't believe it. Cleopatra used to be a black woman. And that's kind of disgusting to know that you used to have a racist grandma that didn't have an Egyptology degree or even probably study anything or could even call herself a historian. But because they like that name, years ago, I heard him go through this idea and then finally explain she was all Macedonian. And she goes, man, I just like that name. And it's like, oh, wow. Y'all have gone through all of this because of that? How about this one? Cleopatra is a Greek name. It's a Macedonian Greek name. It's like beloved of the Father, Patra. Yeah, so we all kind of know. In fact, what's amazing is we know a lot more about her and this whole situation than a lot of other things around there because of its confluence with a few different people going in there. And so it's not really left up to ambiguity in any way. But strangely, the blacks, whenever they tried to do this and pull this off, they want to act like, well, we're not really sure. And so it's entirely possible that a West Sub-Saharan Bantu might have shown up and then somehow became a princess. And, we're not sure about this one lady that would have been her grandmother. So at best, she'd be a quarter, even if we could pull that off. But I can't think straight. Well, they even incested to each other to make sure they didn't get with the Egyptians. But in this, you also find out, because of what they say, she might have been Egyptian, therefore black, as if the Egyptians were black people in some way. And now I've seen a couple of little clips they show, and what's amazing is they're all black people. All the Egyptians are black people, and then they have a couple of little flunkies running around doing errands for them. And what are that? Those are people that look like the current Egyptian population. What's going on with that? Oh, you have to figure it out with Afrocentrism and so on. But let's just continue. Again, more Zahi Hawass.
Pharaonic history, because black was never the true color of Cleopatra.
This is a documentary. If you make a documentary, it has to be the truth. You invite scholars, archaeologists, to give their opinion about Cleopatra. No one, no archaeologist, can say at all that Cleopatra was black. And therefore, I really think if it's drama, if Netflix make a drama film, they have the right to do what they want. But to write at the beginning of the film that this film has nothing to do with history. It is from the imagination of the film director or the film producer.
So, in reality, it's actually physically impossible for a Bantu to have even been in the picture in Egypt. They actually didn't even know it existed. They're so far away. In a jungle area in the Congo that is pretty small if you take a look at it, and also shoved across a Great Sahara that's bigger than the United States going across, but impassable. Picture Death Valley as big as the United States, and picture that it's full of lions. So it never happened, and they're actually not related to any East Africans or Nilotics either, but you'll find that it's a one-way trip here where they try to claim we and point over there. We even had one recently right in front of me turn around and tell them they need to keep the name out their mouth, or basically quit saying you're us instead of yourselves. And the guy just played it off like, oh, okay, well, that's over with. And it's like, no, apparently not. But of course, talking to one and feeling like it makes a meaning to a group of them that are all caught up in this would be something else. But Cleopatra, regardless of if you like the name or not, doesn't have anything to do with West Sub-Saharan Africans. In fact, none of Egypt does either. The naming of Africa. All North Africa was always Caucasians around the Mediterranean. In fact, here's a key for you. You might have heard before, Mediterranean means Middle Earth to the people that lived around there, and they're all endemic Caucasians. It's well known, but you hear blacks kind of playing everything else because it doesn't fit with their lie and model. And you're like, well, look at this. And then they try to claim that it's been whitewashed while they try to blackwash and lie something. Well, let's see. One of them is rooted in the truth and everything that everybody knows, and the other one is presented by jealous people that had nothing to do with it, trying to interject themselves. Does this even weigh on a scale, or are we like not even needing to look at a scale here, people? Let's continue.
Look at Cleopatra. We have many statues of Cleopatra. One at the Vatican.
So,
we have many statues of Cleopatra. One at the Vatican.
I can't seem to catch it. And one at the Vatican.
We have many statues of Cleopatra. One at the Vatican.
Oh my gosh.
We have many statues of Cleopatra. One at the Vatican.
So, even though it's been flying by, and I don't know why they wouldn't go the other way with it or something, but they have to slowly go up the body and then ta-da, look at that face, what do you think? But I think this fits well within what we're going to see that he actually found at Taposirus Magna, and it kind of fits with the other depictions we've all seen from her and so on else. I wonder if they really checked this one, if they found that it had been painted in its past or whatever going on, but we have a lot of depictions of her, and no one's even hinted or indicated that she could have been black. Well, she could have been part Egyptian. The Egyptians were always Caucasians. They were never West Sub-Saharan Bantu type people. See, here's where we have that problem. They didn't even know Egypt existed, and Egypt's always been Caucasians. then the big burn there is that DNA stepped up to the plate recently and showed that, yeah, even though there are blonde and redheads in there, their genetics of old kind matches ancient Anatolia and current modern Western Europeans. This is done by Max Planck Institute and the people that are on the cutting edge of everything, saying this straight out. And after there was ones that showed that King Tut was R1b, and then they go, that's related to 50 to 75% of everybody over here in males and Westerns. What's going on here? Well, some people have been trying to say it all along, but other people are trying to play it off and say, well, that redhead might be from Natron, or the blonde might be from Natron. And you go, well, this is one with the dark hair, so how come it didn't affect her? Oh, no. So somebody finally decided, well, let's just take some natron, put some hair in it, see what happens. Didn't change it one bit, didn't change it one layer of color in any bit whatsoever. None. So there are depictions of her showing this in a more Greek form, which I guess really makes a lot of sense, being her a Macedonian, but there are other depictions like the one I kept flipping to a minute ago that show her in the Egyptian form of Isis. Let's look at that.
One at the Rosicrucian Museum, and I discovered one statue in my excavation in cooperation with Kathleen Martinez on the search of the tomb of Cleopatra inside a temple called Taposirus Magna, located 55 kilometers west of Alexandria.
So recently, and it got to be kind of big news, this is the first person that's really known as a Mexican archaeologist that's in Egypt and able to take a full dig on. And this is something that they had on the books a little bit and something she was interested in. And so bam, so they try to look for this temple of Taposirus Magna. And as soon as they do, they realize that this hasn't really been touched. It's just, it got ruined along with everything else and people let it go. So they started digging it out and they found over 10 coins with depictions on her that are minted during this same time. And even this depiction on the wall, which strangely, instead of showing her Egyptologist-like and in that form of Isis, shows her as Isis, but it was more of Venus, the counterpart of the Greeks to that same situation, along with Mark Antony and so on. And so we get this depiction of her. And they try to write it off in any way, and it's like, look, the Egyptians that were hanging around at the time with her made pictures of her. This is the way she looks. It gets to the point where it's silly, where you feel like you need to explain yourself to them as opposed to going the other way, which can't be explained correctly. And why are you putting a Bantu in here? They didn't even know that. Oh, they don't want to know that. See, they had this dream going on that they used to know Egypt existed. Let's continue here.
We found a beautiful face of Cleopatra. We also discovered about 15 coins have the face and the name of Cleopatra. And we do have the famous scene of Cleopatra depicted on the facade of the temple of Hathor, the goddess of beauty and love in Dandra. If you look at the image of Cleopatra and the scenes, you will never see any features that can show Cleopatra black.
Is all this fuss about racism against dark-skinned people? Often, this trivial question is asked by people who do not understand the dimensions of the larger issue and the political agendas involved. Surely, it is not racism against dark-skinned people, otherwise we would not have loved the movie Black Panther, played by actor Chadwick Boseman, whose death...
Yeah, R.I.P. Chadwick. But this got black people all wired up that somehow there was this magical place somewhere in Africa that actually was advanced at one time. And they have a super medal and drink a purple drink and have fights to the death on waterfalls and all these type of things. And it's like, no, it isn't. That was made up by a Jewish man when he made up a comic book. But blacks really eager to take on anything other than the reality of what they know they went through and who they were are trying to accept anything. In fact, secretive to a lot of people, they didn't understand how bad this "we was Egyptian" thing ran deep until something like this shows up. And I hope that what this does is opens up a dialogue to where we can end up explaining, no, 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 you're a cargo cult. Let's see what that is. Oops. So maybe you ought to look into who you are. Here, let's look deep into it. Oh, I know you don't want to. Oh, you really, really don't want to. What? Have you been taught to hate yourself? What are you doing here? Don't blame any of this on us. Don't blame any of the of any of this crap on us. We're the ones that have been trying to prop you up this whole time more than any other person ever has been in humanity, and you're the one that comes out the end of it trying things like this. We was. Yeah, you ought to try one and show yourself in the Bible and stuff somehow, and just see how that ends up going with the religious people. Let's continue.
Saddened everyone. Or, for example, who could forget John Coffey, the giant black man with the innocent childlike mind in the movie The Green Mile, portrayed by American actor Michael Clarke Duncan.
I'm sure a lot of y'all have seen this, and it's just fantastic. And of course, it's got Tom Hanks in it and so on, and it pulls it off good. And during the time, it was heralded as fantastic something, even though it has like, well, he's got some kind of voodoo magic and sucks the cancer out of people and does this stuff and turns them into bugs. I don't know what that all is, but yeah, it's just got a little fanciful over the edge type of thing, but that's real cool. But I've even heard blacks bitch about the fact that they show him to be small-minded, if you will, and da-da-da and everything else. And it's like, look, do you want us to lie to you? And they're like, yes. And it goes, sorry, we're not supposed to lie about everything and then try to live lies. But was Duncan Clark? No. I've got one for you too. The other guy, Tom Hanks, he ended up playing a special disabled retarded type person here in the movie too. Is that okay? Oh, the lens that we try to have nowadays versus the lens whenever you can look at movies where you're like, oh yeah, I like this a whole lot. You're not supposed to because X. And everybody pulling agendas off of it. It's gotten past disgusting. But if you want to see some that's real disgusting, primitives, some West Sub-Saharan Africa that didn't know Egypt existed are trying to claim that, no, there might have been one that snuck in over there and then somehow they didn't notice, even though all black people like Nubians weren't even allowed by decrees that are well known, but they want to omit that idea too, and they snuck in. Oh wait, no, she became a princess and then the Pharaoh of Egypt. What the hell are you trying to pull off? Well, it sounds good to us. I bet it does.
So, the issue is not about racism, but rather anyone who is aware criticized the upcoming Netflix work because of their full awareness of Afrocentrism, an intellectual model that essentially supports the superiority of the black African race.
See, so what we're having here now is these primitives that didn't know anything existed trying to pull off a superiority clause in the middle of an inferiority complex. And a feigning to want to realize who they really were, so they feel like they're having identity crisis, which is not really there. It's been shown for them, but they don't like that. They want to pull off some little fancy idea where they invented civilization, and if they can say to Egypt, da-da-da, well, no, look, we've got, Sumeria even predates that. We've got a Fertile Crescent that went on going back 7, 8, 10,000 years. Here's Göbekli Tepe and everything else. And believe it or not, I've actually seen blacks start trying to say, oh, well, we must have been the Natufians. Okay, where the Natufians go? Oh, all up into the Levant and everything else. And like, oh, we was this, we was that. And you look at archaeology and it goes, no. You look at genetics and it goes, no. In fact, no matter what, no. What are you doing here? What are you trying to pull off?
And that all the important achievements in human history were made by them, and that the origins of civilizations were African, including the great pharaonic Egyptian civilization. The African-American Molefi Keti Asante is considered the spiritual father of this intellectual term, as he...
There's really a handful of them with, spreading all the way from Kita and Diop and all kinds of different people that have just really become the laughing stock. And believe it or not, blacks go, oh, this guy is an Egyptologist, or he's this or he's that. And they go, nope, he doesn't have any of that either. Oh, he says he's a reverend. Yeah, that's great. That's great. That's great. He first formulated this, though, in the 1980s. This corresponds to just after around the time that Michael Jackson made a video, Remember the Time, where he tried to show Magic Johnson and other black people that do not look at all like any Egyptians ever shown at all, and genetics shows nope. But he put that in there, and lo and behold, we've had this blossoming of jealousy and envy, and then we can't even understand and see things. And if you try to look up any of these things that Afrocentrics have looked up, you'll find these real pale ladies and everything else in the art, and they've got to clip that out and then show contrast and change it and Photoshop that a little bit and end up going, oh, see? And it's like, you know what you just did. Everybody now knows what you just did. Here's another picture of the same thing. Wow, how disgusting does this get? So you really, really know for sure you had nothing to do with it, but out of jealousy, you're going through these trouble of photoshopping things and other stuff. And if one black person said something one time, they're still telling you to this day, no matter if it's been professionally debunked repeatedly, they can't hear that. They somehow still repeat this thing that's kind of ambiguous from way back when, as if that had any validity.
He was the first to formulate it in the 1980s. Asante believes that American and European colonialism contributed significantly to the disappearance of contributions from black Africans and to minimizing their achievements throughout history.
Because you see, all of humanity and all of science is all in some big cahoots trying to hold the black man back because they're so incredibly magical and virtuous and things like that, that we have to hold them down. And it's like, you mean the people that we're propping up more than any people in history that used to be pre-Neolithic primitives just recently? What are you trying to pull off? Imagine how pathetic this looks to anybody that even slightly knows.
The reason that all of us are against this film, because the film is not following history. The film is making a false imagination about Cleopatra on history. Cleopatra was a Macedonian queen. If you look at all the queens and the princesses of Macedonia, no one really was black. Although at the same time, you can see the marriage of the Ptolemies. Ptolemies 12 was the father. He had a son, Ptolemies 13, and Cleopatra. Then there is no way that you can see Cleopatra as black at all. And can you imagine that Cleopatra, how can she capture the hearts of Caesar and Mark Antony?
At this point, I see somebody behind the camera probably going, oh, no, watch out, because how could she capture the heart of Mark Antony and Caesar and stuff if she was a Bantu? But somebody has just decided to push the real button here and get it out, but hold on.
There is no way, if she was blonde, she would not capture the hearts, because there is many blonde women in Rome. If she was black, she would not capture his heart, because at that time, many blacks were not really from the family of Ptolemies.
Not really from the family of, I'm going to try to cover this up real quick. Blacks weren't even allowed in Egypt at this time. There's well-known decrees So he did it again. So I've had it, so here we go. Because he tried to pull this, well, she couldn't have been blonde somehow. And then he turns around and tells you, well, all the Macedonians are full of blondes. Right? Didn't he say that? So it wouldn't entice them in any way if she would have perhaps been just like the women that they really like back home. Which I don't know if you know or not. That's a very stupid statement going on. But why does he keep trying to go away from this blonde idea? Here, let me just show you a couple of things showing you ancient Egyptians with blonde hair, and it's well known and verified. And it's in his Cairo museum right in front of him. I wiki the word hair. Let me go back up here, sorry. There's a lot on here, people. But I'm going to go back to the top. You see this hair. You just wiki hair. And ironically enough, Oprah Winfrey's barber was allowed to reclassify hair into hair types a little bit more extravagant. And so he's got all this going on with straight and wavy, curly, and then kinky hair, and so on, going all the way up through the scale here, but that's not for it. And they talk about polar bears crying warmth through their hair and things, and then curly hair. And whenever you look at curly hair, what is shown as the example of curly hair is actually a blonde scalp, not some wig or anything. This is with the scalp and everything of an Egyptian noble woman. And it says that it's from tomb 23, yellow blonde curly hair and scalp, from which had a long black wig over the top of it of wig plait remains. So under her black wig was a blonde hair. Now I want you to pretend in your mind that this would have been the only blonde somehow to magically pop up like popcorn, or were there more? Well, yeah, there's more. There's Thuya and Yuya, who we've got to realize that Tutankhamun is one of the big shows and the big draws there. You know, it's like Mickey Mouse to Disney. And so Tutankhamun, well, they recently found out that he's R1b genetics, and that hooks up to people like Tsar Nicholas of Russia and 50 to 75%, depending on exactly where we're at, in Western European males. Oh no, so that causes some types of problems here with the idea and what they can try to go with it, but let me see if I can do this. If I simply go to DuckDuckGo and look up Thuya and Yuya, I'll end up getting pictures of King Tut's grandparents here. Let's see, under images, well, they keep showing their coffins here, and then they show them in black and white. He looks like Abraham Lincoln. She looks like a cottony-eyed England girl or whatever. But if we take a look at any color shots of them, what are we looking at here? Where we're looking at people with a Caucasian phenotype and then blonde hair. So picture Abe Lincoln with blonde hair. It pretty much looks like it in some way. And that's her grandparents and stuff. So now we're getting up in the middle dynasties, and you'd have to say, wow, so there's all of this going on. Yeah, there's all of that going on. And we could just simply look up blonde haired ones. But I'm going to pick one for you that blows everything out of the water, because here we go with the idea of looking up somebody like Ginger, pre-dynastic Ghibelline money. Pre-dynastic Ghibelline mummy. I don't know if that'll pull it up or not. Oh yeah, here it is. So here he is, this pre-dynastic Ghibelline mummy. It's in the British Museum, on exhibit, has been for ages. Shows him with the Nakata artwork and things like that, like it would have been found with, kind of showing you a burial situation done here. before they ever even started embalming people. In fact, a lot of people believe that them finding desiccated bodies that have been saved like this made them turn around and try to use natron to make that happen artificially. But let's just take a close look at who we're talking about here, because this is ginger. Why do they call him ginger? Well, some people call that red hair. A lot of people look at it and say that's really blonde, and if you want to go strawberry blonde, you might be able to, but he's got blonde hair on him, and this is pre-dynastic Ghibelline mummy. Now, Zahi Hawass tells you there's this idea that it may have been Asiatics and Semitics. It may have been the Libyan people, because Africa used to all be called Libya. So it may have been the endemics that were there. And then there's this third effect, somehow that's separate from that, that the original Petrie and the original Egyptologists, whenever they found this and other artifacts, said, well, these might have been the people that kicked it off and started it off. Well, the answer is yes to all three. Those three coming together as one, including some Sumerians and so on, and DNA has ended up proving this. This is not some far-fetched thing or anymore, or somebody going, I see blonde hair, I'm a little confused. So they ended up proving this out of it, and ginger goes from pre-dynastic. There is no, where are these West Sub-Saharan Bantu people? Well, then they finally come clean and they go, well, it wasn't us, but some black people someplace. And it's like, well, no, that's not in effect, and that still leaves you at the level you were at. And you don't want that. It was the whole purpose of you doing this. So now it all falls apart. Why do we keep doing that? You can look up Khufu's granddaughter. She has red hair in that. Seti himself, Ramses the Great, all these other people are red hairs and blondes that are in there. So it is kind of strange that Zahi Hawass tries to go, hey, she wasn't black. And then he tries to weigh a scale with that and then go, she wasn't blonde. And it's like, well, nobody has yet, I'm not sure if anybody ever said she was blonde, but why is that a big difference between what you think of Macedonians? Because you just say, when the Romans come here and all this type of stuff they know, or do you believe the Romans didn't have any blonde-haired people? In fact, here, weirdly way to put this, and the ancient Aryans and so on were all supposed to be blonde-haired, blue-eyed people, and you can find blue-eyed statues from the earliest dynasties and around the pyramids in Egypt. You can find it in the Sumerians. You sure well know that it went on in the north, and now we're talking about something that we've known about all along, and we don't have to pretend we have amnesia about it, and the connectives of people. Give you one more look here before we go off to the end of this and let Zahi eventually talk one more time. Let's see here. Now I'm just going to put in reserve heads because that's what it is. Even though there is reserve heads Egypt and so on, I'm just going to go just reserve heads. What shows up when I type in reserve heads? These are the earliest dynasties again too, done by the Egyptian artists themselves, of reserve heads. You can think of the later Nefertiti type statue that shows you a holotype of what she really looked like, whether they're going to turn and do something with that or not. And so you look at these people, and I don't think anybody's going to be willing to say that any of them are anything but what we thought. In fact, a lot of times when you look at them, you go, oh, if I told you this was a Nordic person, you'd have to agree with it. Well, believe it or not, Nordics have some of the same genetics in there. I don't think anybody's trying to say Nordics were the Egyptians, but there was this thing too. Then again, with that blue-eyed effect going on, and we say today, in a modern day, you probably have heard it, all blue-eyed people come from an area in the Caucasus region, and then they spread out. Well, it looks like they spread into Egypt and formed that, and into here. Oh, hold on, these are the Yamnaya people, the heralds of civilization that we talked about. Now we call them Indo-European, but that really just means the same thing as the other. So we have this reserve heads idea, and you can look at all the little pictures that are around it here too and see that there's not like, oh boy, one of them appears to be a girl, and I think they figured out who that was because of that fact. The rest of them are males, it seems. But then if we're not looking at this exact cachet, but other caches that are in the earliest dynasties, there is another female. Where's she at? There is another female, which a lot of people believe that's her. And you can see her hair tucked back and curled at the front, but she would have a wig put on too. But that's, of course, external. And because she might change her hair, here's just the holotype or reserve head of her naturally, and then we get to put a wig on it, or she does herself. So that's pretty amazing. And this again is the earliest of dynasties. And there's quite a few of these. And back in the earliest dynasties, they used to draw people that have a little bit more straight look to them and stuff. And I don't know, but I've shown this one before here, and somebody actually took Photoshop and put a business suit coat on him, or did they really do it and then take a picture, and a hat on him, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, he looks like that Elon Musk. Oh yeah, what? Well, he's an African.
It is unfortunate what the film industry has come to recently. Hollywood has become more supportive of dirty political agendas than ever before. In Hollywood and Netflix currently, and it is their favorite hobby that they love to do in their spare time.
And number two, the most important thing, that you look at all the scenes on the temples of the Old, the Middle, and the New Kingdom, and you see the Egyptian king is fighting the enemies. In front of him, a Nubian, a man from Africa, a Libyan, an Asiatic. Look at the faces of them.
He's talking about that smiting pose, which actually goes along with Orion and its pose. And this smiting pose that can be shown all the way back at the Narmer palette and before and into that time and all the way through that. But anybody that's being honest can easily look at whenever, like, Ramses has got them all by the head, and there's 3 or 4 different nations, but he's got them all by the hair there. This one's a Nubian, and yeah, he looks kind of like a black person. And then there's an Asiatic, and there's a Libyan, and boy, the Libyan is kind of drawn pale. How could that be possible? But well, hold on a second. That's the same color as Ramses and the other pharaohs that are in that same position there. It's a famous thing that got shown to Afrocentrics whenever they tried to come up with all that. So you're like, what's the deal in this photograph? And if they ever got asked that, they would either instantly deflect or just not refer to it and try to talk about something else, which is another deflection and so on. And then they were, well, we're not talking about the Nubians. We were the Caucasian Egyptians. And it's like, really? West Sub-Saharans didn't know Egypt existed. What do you keep trying to do here? Because you're making your people look like a clown on the world stage. And you're certain of these things. And everybody's trying to show you reality. So, and at first we're of course like, now, looky here, that ain't true. And next thing you know, don't try to whitewash, and oh, you've got this problem. You've seen it before. If not, it's in your face right now. If you've tried to deny it up until this point, you can't deny it anymore. They're trying to make movies where they go, well, the reason that she could be black is that the Macedonians could have gotten with an Egyptian here, her grandmother, so she might be a quarter at the best if that was a Nubian Bantu. So, and it's like, you know, you made a couple of leaps there that don't exist and are impossible. But let's continue.
Nubian, or the faces of the African, they cannot look like the Egyptian king at all. The theory that made everyone to think that ancient Egypt was black civilization, it came through Sheikh At-Tabyuk from Senegal. He announced it because he saw a statue of Ramses II, black, a statue of Tutankhamun, black, and he made a statement that
he made this statement that the Egyptians were black. In fact, he's kind of known for getting up there to the microphone and then going, yes, Egypt was a black man. Really, all of Egypt was one black man, huh? Do you have any common sense here? Funny thing, hilarious to Afrocentrics is that At the very first of this, he tried to claim that it was just his people of Senegal or whatever, and that West Africans, you can tell just by looking at them, their phenotype's different, so they weren't the Egyptians. But then shortly, they took it over to the cargo cult ideas. Next thing you know, they're all on the back of it and everything. It's all been debunked. This idea from the mountains of a moon, and it says it on this script, and somebody that's got that right now, a professor that can just really read it right off to you straight, says there's nothing like that in here whatsoever. It's hilariously sad, but blacks are still repeating it. But people like Diop and things like this were totally debunked. He's going to tell you in a minute, as soon as it happened, everybody's all like, we ain't got any proof of that whatsoever. But he thought that he had proof because what he was looking at was the Ka statue of Ramses, which is actually known to be a pale, leucoderm, red-headed person. Oh, it's been quadruple confirmed in DNA and the whole 9 yards. But he saw the Ka statue, which is usually drawn black, and then he said, I know there's 6 other statues here, and then counting all the depictions on the wall, there's 1,400. But I'm going to go with this one Ka thing and then make myself up to where we were them, because I can't think straight. And it's hard to believe that blacks would be behind it after all that happened. It's like, I'm behind the embarrassment, but you'll still hear it to this day because nobody really calls them out on it because it's got a special word. They attempt to call you racist if you tell them the truth. Now, somebody real smart not too long ago said if the truth becomes racist, then we have a real big issue, don't we? But here we are. Welcome to 2023, where finally they tried to put out this thing that double self-exposes them on there. Well, Egypt might have been black. Well, I don't know. Cleopatra might have been black, and therefore that's why she might have been black. Well, how did she get to be a West African Bantu? I don't know. Oh, it just all falls apart. How quick does it fall apart? Quicker than I can even say it.
The ancient Egyptians were black. UNESCO in 1970 made a conference to discuss that. And they said, we have no evidence to prove that the Egyptians were black. We have 2 theories about the origin of the ancient Egyptian. Some scholars believe that ancient Egypt were Semitic, means people came from Asia, and Hamitic, that people came from Africa. They based their theory, if you look today at how the people look in the Delta, they're very light. If you look at the people in Upper Egypt, they're dark, but not black. But there's another theory. A cemetery was found by Petrie, the father of Egyptology, in Akkada, a big large cemetery, and he did announce that this could be the people who made this civilization.
So he's saying something that I said just a few moments ago, but basically, which one do you think it is? Well, it was a Semitic people that came in with cattle and stuff, but then again, the other half of that would have not been Semitic that came in. And then there's an Afro-Asiatic people that are in between that, where people try to call it that situation there. And of course, just because it says Afro doesn't mean they had afros. Again, Africa was named by endemic Caucasians that have been there forever, at least 30,000 years. But whenever that 30,000 years happened, the original split out of Africa and back in, not all of them left. It's always been Caucasians there. Even Soy Kita admitted in a interview at the end of it, where he did a presentation at the end, he let him ask questions, and I had an Afrocentric ask, when has there ever been somebody that looked like Liz Taylor, Cleopatra, in Egypt? And he said 60,000 years at least, because of going in and out. Well, actually before that, because so actually always kind of shattering that whole ideal that they had. We was, and believe it or not, Soy Kata's quite often, let's just say, ambiguous enough that leads on Afrocentrics quite a bit. So we have that issue again and again. West Sub-Saharans didn't even know Egypt existed. So it's kind of beyond that.
What I want to say, that the origin of ancient Egypt were Egyptians.
Well, if they came out of West Asia and in with domesticated cattle and grains and everything, the origin would have been West Asians that came into Egypt and then started becoming what you would think of as Egyptians. And we also know that there were endemic Caucasians of North Africa. And when the Sahara was green, right before this kicked in, there were a lot of oases and people all around through there, and a great river that ran through there, and so on. So there were a lot of Caucasians out from there too. So your first little idea, is that valid? Yeah, definitely. What about the idea that there's these other blonde-haired people that are there, whether you think of them showing up somehow, or that it's possible that the endemic African Caucasians that are there had blonde hair, because here's Ginger, the blonde-haired Gibelin mummy. Or if you look at Mesopotamia and how they had the same situation going on too, and then there's all these connections with that, and there's got to be an element of that happening too. Great, well, which one of them were black? None of them. What? Yeah, none of them. You don't have to be included in everything. In a modern day where you're trying to expect it every time that something gets made that you get inclusive to somehow, history is not one that you can change and put it like that. But they desperately tried just recently, and I think this is a huge self-exposure of themselves, but also at the same time, it might get a dialogue going on. Okay, this is what you were, this is where you were, this is the way these things were, this is the Egyptians, these are what they did, from the pre-dynastic all the way through. What about the 25th dynasty? That's said to be Kushites, but you can look up viceroys of Kush and see who ruled them over at the time in question and what they actually say right there in that. But also want you to understand, you're not related to Nubians or Horners in any way either. So pointing at them and saying we is pretty pathetic. Got another video coughed up right here, and I found them both here, and the other one shows an Afrocentric that tries to pull off some kind of idea and stuff, and it's really self-exposing too. Don't know which one I'll go with first, but I believe I'm going to do this one, and then after you have this knowledge and then we get into that situation, you'll be like, ha ha ha. Anyhow.
Again, I would like to say that Netflix made a big mistake by showing Cleopatra black, and I think they should write at the beginning of this film that this film is fiction. Zahi Hawass.
So, regardless of what you think about Zahi Hawass, there is that strange thing where he just vehemently acted like the other side of a scale would be a blonde person somehow, and all the way from the pre-dynastic all the way through, we can find blonde hair in Egypt, and blue eyes too, by the way. You can look that up and you'll find even more of them. But you won't find him showing it off too much, although there is a documentary showing him with a blue-eyed, crystal blue-eyed statue, claiming that it's his favorite out of all of Egypt because he was with a group that ended up finding it one time, and the thing stared at him and followed him around the room. But for him to use the blonde thing as some type of kicker, and then to try to pretend, well, they like blondes where he comes from, right? So if she was a blonde, he wouldn't have liked her, and you're like, hey, that can't even work in my mind mentally. Why is it you've said it 7 times now? It's like you feel like on one end of the scale you've got blonde people, on the other end of the scale you've got blacks, and you're trying to omit both of them. Okay, we can easily omit the black situation. It's actually an impossibility. But then again, where are all these blonde-haired, blue-eyed people? And they might have come from Asia. Well, we know for a fact all those blue-eyed people 10,000 years ago were up near Göbekli Tepe. Yeah, and they came down through and into Africa, and there's no border there or anything stopping anybody from going just right around the Mediterranean. But there is a border on the other end. It's an impossible desert that you can't go through. So there's that. Anyhow, let me know what you think. I mean, believe it or not, I can go on for hours. I can show you blondes depicted in Egyptian artwork for hours. I can end up showing you crystal blue-eyed statues and talk about that for an hour or two, and so on. But you can look them up yourself. Then again, you can look up Aslar Man and see where these people were and what was going on with them at the time in question, where they were in the level of humanity, and then find out, well, they talk about Iwo Liru and so on there. Yeah, click on that. What's that? Little 4 foot tall, football headed, small brain, still extant hominid like Homo erectus form. Well, after the last ice age, what's going on there? You don't get to hear about that too much because it's our word. If you tell the truth and if you know something somehow, oh no. Let me know what you think down below. But yeah, finally Zahi Hawass said something about it, and I don't even have to read it off and try to act like I've got his accent or anything here. That was just this straightforward here. Say no to Netflix Blak Cleopatra, it says here on the side of it. And in fact, over here on the right, I'm seeing 3 or 4 talking about how they're just tanking and doing badly. 1% audience score at this point. I'm sure they're going to find out, and they're going to try to inflate that up. Get the Afrocentrics. Come on, you click the button too, and see if they can get something to happen. Just like some of the other shows, like Peter Pander, and it ended up like having 350,000 dislikes versus 3,000 likes, and it's like, wow, that's a ratio that, can you tell now why they took off the like button, knowing that we're fixing to run through a bunch of stuff that's going to be real self-exposing? So we took that off so people wouldn't feel bad because of feelings. Let me know what you think down below. Ooh, I got another one coming though. Yeah. Peace.